Hi everybody, it's Scott here, and another edition of All Things Music. So today we have two very special guests with us. We have Mr. Jack Sutte, who is a member of the Cleveland Orchestra Trumpet Section. He's also a professor at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory of Music, and soon to be professor at Cleveland State. Is that this year here starting, Jack?
Starting this fall.
Starting this fall. So that's great for him. So thank you for being on. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We have here Mr. Joe Hunter, a professional piano player here in the Northeast Ohio area for many, many years. He's also played all over the place throughout the U.S. and is a professor of 20 years, roughly, at Tri-C, Cuyahoga Community College in the Jazz Studies program. So thank you, Joe, for being here.
Thanks for asking.
So today we're going to be talking about practicing. I know it can be a kind of a dull subject because you hear a lot about it, but we're going to try to breathe a little bit of freshness into it. So we have a list of questions that we've kind of prepared for you all. We're just going to go down these and talk about practicing and different ways that we can approach it. So the first question is, what is the single most important piece to having an effective practice session? And we'll start with you, Jack.
I think you need to start with an easy state of mind. Like, be ready to work, be ready to practice, be ready to listen to yourself. Just be ready, be at ease, nothing too serious.
Right. Okay, all right.
I like that response, because I didn't really know how to answer that. But yes, I think probably the single most important thing is your mental state of mind when you sit down to try to get some work done.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And the only thing I would add to that, me personally, is if I don't have kind of a plan of attack when I go in, I need to have some goals. Attainable, achievable goals, but some goals that I am prepared to try to attain. Otherwise, for me, it can get a little, I can get off track. So if I have some goals.
I think it's good to be organized. Yeah, we're talking about two different genres here,
yes,
from the classical world and the jazz world, and I'm sure there's different goals that you would have that the jazz player would have, and there's specific things that the jazz player would need to address, particularly a piano player. So to be organized in that fashion is I think very, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. Work on voicings. I'm going to do technique. I'm going to work on transcription. I'm going to work on repertoire. For instance.
Right. Okay. All right. Anything else?
Great.
Okay. So the second question we have is what can you do to keep your practice sessions fresh? So anything that you can throw out there that you think might help people keep them fresh from one to the next. You want to start, Joe?
I'll turn it to Jack.
I think having different shoes, different clothes, different rooms, different environments, I think that's a great way to keep things different. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more boring than trying to do the same thing all the time. So be creative, try new things, do the different, do something new.
Right. And
put your feet up, right?
Right? Yeah, and try to step out on the limb a little bit.
Absolutely.
Right? Try different things so you can, have a different experience. And even though it may not be something that you're trying to attain necessarily, like not a goal that you're setting, if you step off to the side, sometimes you can learn what not to do. Or, instead of learning what to do.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that, no.
Okay, all right. So the next question is, give us one idea that can help while practicing rhythm.
Well, I had a great teacher when I attended Cleveland State University many, many years ago. There was no jazz studies program, so I was studying classical music and studying, composition and counterpoint, and I had a very good classical piano teacher named Andreas Kaprevičius, wonderful Lithuanian concert pianist, and he taught many of the great Cleveland jazz piano players that when I was coming up. He was the one that taught me the importance of subdivision and how to use a metronome. I have to admit, I very often showed up to these lessons unprepared. He knew I was never going to be a classical pianist. I came into college already being a jazz player.
Sure.
But the lessons were never wasted. So oftentimes, probably more than he would like, we talked about technique. and scales and arpeggios, specifically in broken chords. And he was the one that taught me how to use the metronome. Eighth note, quarter note, eighth note triplet, 16th note, and to just become completely immersed and comfortable with this subdivision and the notion of all the beats that are the rhythms that are existing in any pulse or any tempo, whatever you want to call it. And that was really, really helpful to me. And it's something that it's been part of my teaching. For since then, ever since I got into teaching, I always think about him and just that notion. Using the metronome to play like when very fast passages, or scale work, or when they're trying to learn fingering. I always have them go play half notes against it. So a tempo that would ordinarily be, so incredibly boring to practice, da, 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 can now have rhythmic vitality when you have da, da, you have this beat up underneath it. So that's been, I've had great response from students on that. And then again, just this notion of subdivision.
Great. I concur. A metronome is a very important device. However, I encourage my students to not use the app on their phone, because then that leads to other subdivisions of the mind which don't enhance your practice. So use the metronome, but also when you're playing in rhythm, and I'm sure you can attest to this in many, many different ways. Know the style of what you're playing in. Some rhythms are real top heavy, some rhythms are back heavy. Now for nuts and bolts, it's easy. Like we're talking about scales, stay with it. But when you're playing with mixed ensembles or performing in different venues that have different acoustics, the rhythm can get a little squirrely. So you got to listen.
Right.
You got to listen. And the rhythm is not always where you think it's going to be. You got to kind of feel it.
Sure.
Just to add to that, within the jazz world, and particularly a rhythm section player like myself, you're going to be playing with external sources of the time, right? You're playing with bass players and drummers. So you want to be the kind of player that can hear where's the beat or how's the beat being felt. As you said, like different styles of music, what's the rhythmic pulse, and then lock into it as soon as possible. So I think that's one of the things that you can you can work on and strengthen by using a metronome. But as Jack said, hearing and knowing the context. But again, how are you going to? You're not always going to be creating. More often than not, you are not creating the rhythmic propulsion. It's a drummer or a bass player, and you have to be the kind of player that can figure out what the heck is going on, how is it being felt, and find the best way to play it.
And playing with the metronome, obviously, acting as the drummer or the bass player helps you also kind of fit in, even though style-wise, I know, but as far as, like you said, nuts and bolts, as far as just learning to play.
Yeah, I mean, just to play it with something other than yourself going like this.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Internalize. Right. Leave your foot on the ground.
But I think we would agree that is definitely the worst way to, develop your rhythmic thing, is to rely upon your feet.
It complicates things.
Right.
Well, it's too. Your heart speeds up and slows down. You never know.
Right. Yeah. The only thing I had to add, and I know that's great stuff, is something that helped me too. And I forget what teacher told me this a long time ago, but I created a rhythm bank. Okay, so what I would do is if I was having a problem with a specific rhythm and I was practicing rhythm, I would take that rhythm and I would write it down in my little notebook, and then I would transcribe it into other time signatures so I could see what it looked like in those other time signatures. So once I learned it, then I was able to replicate it if it came up in another time signature. And I would go as far as if it was a triple feel in a duple time, I would go ahead and write it out in a triple feel too, so I could see how it laid normally. Or if it was a duple feel in a triple time, I would write it back the other way. So I would just keep that and keep each rhythm on a page and just write all the different variations, or not variations, but all transcribing all the different time signatures, so I can see what it looked like. Because it's going to look different, right? From 4/4 to cut time or whatever, it's going to look different, but it's going to feel the same.
Or 6/8.
So right, exactly. So write it down on all those different ones, so you can really see what it looks like in all the different rhythms. Because for me, the number one concept in any type of education or any type of learning experience is transfer of knowledge, right? So if you can transfer your knowledge from one moment to another later in life, when something else comes up again, it's much easier to learn and much easier to replicate, right? So for me, all that's great. Playing with metronome and subdividing and learning how to subdivide, and for me, subdivision is when I look at a piece of music, I look through the entire piece and find the smallest, value, and I try to subdivide to that value throughout the entire piece. So that way, I can place that value. Even if there's only one of them, I can place it in the right spot when I get there, right? So, but the rhythm bank really helps when it comes to remembering and really learning those rhythms to really kind of, not memorize, but internalize those rhythms and be able to just draw upon them, whenever you need to, because you've done that work and created the bank. So,
Cool.
So I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's something that I do, and it really helped me for a long time.
Great.
So, okay, so that was one idea for rhythm. Give us one idea that helps when practicing style or musicality. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but anything else that you want to add to that?
Well, that's a big question, really. It's a big question. I would say, one of the best things you can do if you're aspiring to play jazz music is to immerse yourself in jazz music.
Right.
So the best thing you can possibly do, is to play along with records. Is to play, to just you dive into the deep end of the pool and you try to figure, you get as close to it as you possibly can. It's right. Incredibly valuable to make sure that that's part of your practice life. You have to, play along with records, and little bits of things are left. Residue is left on your brain. Ideas you find ideas. Certainly when I'm dealing with a lot, again, as a rhythm section player, I'm dealing with a lot of different stylistic contexts and settings. So I have that. So that's reflected in what music I would play along with or listen to in preparation for a certain specific performance. I might do that if I'm going to be doing this kind of music with these kind of players, and I'm going to be listening to that music, and maybe. It's not as much for me now, but really when you're getting started. You really want to play with records. It's kind of like the secret of, if you really want to learn how to play jazz, do it like all your heroes did. Really, the true great giants of the music, what do? They put on records and they cop them solos. And then you just internalize them and make your own. You just get next to it. How many? You've heard the story countless times. Oh, I got that Louis Armstrong record and I listened to it 50 times a day, until I learned it. So on and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
I guess for jazz, I would say, interesting in class.
Well, I think a lot of that holds true, where you find the pieces or the artists that you really enjoy listening to, and you want to strive to do that. I would suggest for stretching and improving or learning how to do a phrase in a particular style is to stretch the margins. So if it's piano or forte, try to extend those a little bit, or if there's a gesture that you want to accomplish, overdo it or underdo it or do something, then you can find where the balance is for you and how you really how your ear really wants to sing that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, and this next question is kind of obvious because, again, and I kind of set this up this way because almost every question we've almost been talking about this every time, and so this is going to be anything really to add to this. How important is it to your practicing and overall growth to listen? and we've been talking about this over and over again. Obviously, it's very important.
Well, I mean, as you progress and become a professional musician, I'm not talking to the student. I'm talking about to a professional. If you're a professional artist and you make a living playing music, I would say that listening is as important as practicing. I mean, obviously you have to keep your chops together and all that, but
right.
Listening is paramount. I mean, for me, one of the time I spend in my car doing in life, maybe it's to a gig or just whatever. Mm-hmm. I love to listen to music in my car. It's one of the few situations where it's just me and music.
Right.
You know, there's no distractions. I've done my most profound and effective listening. I also am a big proponent of listening to the same thing over and over again. I find a record that I really like or a player that I'm really, really into, and that's what I'm going to listen to. I just want to. I've just had many profoundly insightful listening sessions, one-on-one in my automobile. So
right, yeah.
Well, I'll add, if I may add to that, Scott's got his turntable and speaker set up here. I think we probably each have a studio at home, not only the car, but to really listen to the tone or the vibration of the tone, so that it doesn't become, at least for brass players, an athletic event. I think if we combine sound with the way that it's moving in a beautiful manner, then we're really effectively listening. I think a lot of young brass players will get caught up in how it feels, or doing this, or how but it's getting the ears to the front of the bell and really being aware of if you're making a beautiful sound or not so beautiful sound.
I like the distinction of there's such a difference between hearing and listening.
Yes.
And the more you become a much more effective musician when you listen better. You're not just hearing. Everybody can hear, and I think certainly within the jazz world, there's a sort of a stage that you go through where you start hearing more, and then you kind of start, imitating. You hear things and you play it back to the person. You think that's really what it's about. When you actually become a mature listening musician, you understand the phraseology and how one thing leads to another.
Right.
Just the ability to listen and to be the kind of player that is always thinking about how do I sound within this setting, not just
right. So it's
the blinders on.
Right. It's very critical listening.
Oh.
You're pulling things apart and analyzing and listening. I mean, not to overanalyze, but to dig in and find out what's going on.
I like to equate it to the soccer field, right? Mm-hmm. You got this ball whizzing around everywhere, all different spin, all different everything. And all the players are kicking around. It's kind of like, in the jazz, or even ideas within the classical confines, if you will, not as free as the jazz idiom, but all those players are watching and feeling and kicking the ball in a manner that's going to spin in the way they want it to. Mm-hmm. It's no different with music and propelling an idea and spinning tone and spinning ideas. So,
yeah, that's great. And that we kind of went into the next question, which is great because they're hand in hand. Which was, what should you be listening to or listening for? And I agree with what you were saying. Just real quick to, and I've had many teachers tell me this. Once you get to a certain proficiency level on whatever medium you're using to produce your music, any growth thereon is listening.
That's the one thing that never stops getting better.
Right.
I mean, you reach a certain level of technical proficiency, and you're a professional player, and you can play the instrument. But the thing that never stops expanding is how much you hear. I hear better now than I did 15 years ago. I know that. I hear more. I hear better.
Yeah. But you're also practicing listening all the time. Not only in your playing or by yourself, but also what others are doing.
Yeah, right.
So, yes. And that's something too. In to kind of just sidestep this and talk about listening in the educational world. I feel like a lot of young band, orchestra, choir directors / private lessons teachers who are teaching young students fail to impress upon them how important listening is. I feel like,
I'm sorry to hear you say that. Is that true?
even though they're trying to build those fundamentals and build this and build that. If you're in 6th or 7th grade and you're playing clarinet and you've never heard a professional clarinetist, how are you supposed to know what the idiomatic sound is and what you're trying to go for? Right? Besides just getting the notes right and getting the rhythms right, you also want to build those great sounds from the beginning as much as possible. And I know some of that has to do with other techniques that I talk about, like air or finger placement or pressure or whatever you're doing, but a lot of it also has to do with having something in here that you're trying to go towards, trying to work towards. And unfortunately, there are a lot of private lessons teachers and teachers who teach band, choir, orchestra who don't talk about listening. There are some who do, but
you can always tell. Like, I've done a lot of adjudicating at jazz festivals, and you can tell the band directors who don't like or listen to jazz,
right?
And it's reflected in the music because they don't really. There's no relationship to they're not
right.
They're not. I've done
some guests where I come in and try to help them prepare for something like that, and I'll ask the students, how many of you have the recording of this tune at home, and nobody raises a hand. Do you know who did it? Do you know what arrangement you're doing? Do you know? And they don't know anything about it, and that's what led me to this. I kind of investigated and talked to a lot of private lessons teachers and directors. Hey, do you hand them recordings? Do you tell them to go to iTunes or whatever? And
well nowadays they have access to everything.
Right?
Everything. It's at their fingertips.
It's right there, and yet still there's not a push, for that. So that's why I wanted to talk about that too, because it's as we all agree, listening may almost be more important than anything else, right? Because if you do all the work but you don't listen, you're not going to have the product because you don't know what you're supposed to emulate. You don't know what you're going for. So anything else to add to listening at all?
I mean, no. Why do we become involved in this endeavor in the first place? Because we like to listen to it, I would say. Music is nice to hear,
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. So this next question is, something that I've talked a lot with my friends about. Should you still practice, or we'll say, or go over stuff you already know?
That certainly would apply to you because you're dealing with this huge body of repertoire.
Yeah, that we see
regularly.
Regularly and over.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there's different levels of mastery, right? So you'll get it. It's like we were talking earlier about listening to something that you're familiar with, and you'll hear something new later.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn to a certain proficiency, and then put it away, and then come back to it a couple months later. You'll find your skill and your ears have changed due to time, but also the efforts that you've put in your practice. Then put it away and come back to it again. I recently did this with the Hindemith Trumpet Sonata. I hadn't played it since my student days at Aspen, and I came back to it a few months ago.
And you're going to perform it?
I did perform it, and it changed dramatically since my kind of youthful exuberance in the piece. And now, as I'm a little bit older, my score study is improved. My ears are probably improved in some ways and not in others, just because of the acoustic concentration. But learning to a level and putting it away, I think, is a good thing. Work on other things, reinforce those skills, come back to it later.
Okay.
Let's see. Because I spent so much time with the Great American Songbook, this vast body of work, and I'm sorry, I wasn't blessed with the kind of brain that can remember everything I've seen. So I have a huge working repertoire, but it's funny how it changes from year to year or every couple of years. And the joke being, I wish I could remember all the tunes I forgot. I have a large body of songs that I can play, but I have to go back and relearn things sometimes, and I'm like, oh, how does that go? What's the bridge to that one again? And there's always kind of
Well, there's no end to the songbook.
Never, ever, ever. It's a life's work, really, true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, agree with all that. That's a great point, Jack. Like, learn it to a certain level of mastery, put it away, come back to it, and grow the piece. And I think for me too, sometimes bringing out something that I'm comfortable with in a practice session can help me either redirect or get back on track, or sometimes it can be something where if I'm having a really intense practice session, something that I can just feel good about as I'm leaving the practice session. Let me pull this out again and sound good on it and feel good about myself, and then step outside, and just feel good about the overall session,
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So that's good. And this question is not necessarily a time thing, although it has to do with time. How long should you practice?
That's really very difficult.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we both at periods at certain points in our lives had to spend hours and hours in the practice room. That was just you're not going to achieve the goals that you want unless you put the time in. That changes as one becomes professional, so that the question is more complicated. I don't have the time nor the interest to practice 3 hours a day. Life is just way too busy. I don't. So that's not going to happen again. I do find that I can get more done in less time the older I get, and I can feel the results of an effective practice session in less time. I just,
Yeah.
And I play all the time.
Right.
So,
So you're practicing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working, I'm playing my instrument all the time. So, I just thought, the idea of doing 4 hours a day, but of course, I went to college. That's what you had to do if you wanted to succeed. That was just all there was to it.
Right.
So I think it's a complicated question.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
I think time is a misnomer for practice. Although we always have a schedule to maintain, especially if you're a young musician, either in junior high or high school, you have other activities, you're in college. Like we were talking about earlier, trying to divide up how much time you have into different parts of what you need to practice is also good. Mm-hmm. But I think for a brass player, and I think you can attest to this, especially young brass players, if you have a certain amount of time, I find it very wise to play half of the time playing and half of the time resting. And different sessions can have that type of proportion. But if you're always playing and then resting and playing and resting, you're never going to be on tired chops. And so if you're practicing on tired chops, you're probably reinforcing habits that you're trying to work out of. And so that becomes the double-edged sword, if you will, of brass playing. The other thing with time is that it's a concentration activity. So if you're not building up your skill and concentration or coming to it again in an easy state of mind, your practice session may be like, and then done, 5 minutes out. So you got to kind of feel your way through it and find what works for you. Young musicians can easily practice 20 to 30 minutes, again, implementing more time, less or equal parts playing or less time playing, depending on what you're practicing. Harder music takes more recovery. As the older you get, the time expands, but you still have to rest within those sessions. So,
yeah. So time is
it's elusive.
Right. It's elusive. So we're talking about time we're not necessarily talking about obviously time as far as what time of day or how many minutes you're actually practicing. It's time is more of a yes, you got to find the time in the hours in the day to do it, but the time spent is, as long as you're doing it effectively, it shouldn't really matter how long you do it, as long as you're in an effective routine or you have some kind of effective goals that you set right for yourself.
Yeah.
So
because the time itself, if you're not careful, as Jack touched on, and it's true for a piano player, I mean, there are health risks.
Sure.
You can hurt your chops. You can get I've grown up with people that developed very bad tendonitis or carpal tunnel because I know their mind wasn't right and they were just kind of practicing like this, and like, add it, and they hurt themselves.
Right, and you can practice throughout your practice session or throughout the day. You can practice in various ways. We talked about practicing by listening, practice by, you can score study, you can actually physically play your instrument. So there are various ways to practice, to break that up too, and to keep it healthy and keep it
or just technical passages without using lips.
Right, just getting through certain finger stuff and all that. So perfect. I talked to a lot of friends, especially friends who are more on say the semi-pro or pro level, who talk about that they don't have time for this stuff. But I think it's more important for younger players. But we'll see what you guys say. Is warming up and cooling down for your practice sessions worth it?
I don't. The cooling down, I think, would be more. I think more of a brass or kind of a horn thing. I play with all these guys all the time, these big band gigs, and we're packing up, and they're sitting there going, you hear Steve do that all the time.
Yeah.
And people. So I guess that must be part of the.
I think warming up is like any athletic endeavor. You're going to stretch, warm up, do some light jogging before you start sprinting. So if we use that analogy, we can apply it to any instrument easily, scales, arpeggios, whatever. And then afterwards, for me, it depends on it depends on my mood. Like if I'm tired, I don't want to play on tired chops. But I may do just enough to feel like I'm getting some touch back. So that the next day I'm not coming in where my chops are feeling like flat or they feel like they've been really beat up. Yeah. Right. And it maybe just be or just it could be as easy as that. So simple things. For me, it's no extended long cool down thing, because then I think again you're playing on tired chops depending on what you were doing for the show. Right. And you can reinforce if you're not wise about it or listening, because again we're trying to capture the sound after we've worked. You can create more bad habits.
Right. Yeah, and I know I have a couple different warm-up routines. One is for if I know I'm going to be in for a long haul practice session. One's going to be if I'm in a shorter practice session, and one's like, hey, I just arrived at the gig and the downbeat's in 5 minutes type thing. Something to get me ready right away. Right. So I have a couple different warm-up routines that for different situations. So I think it's important if you can try to do that, come up with something that works for you. That'll help. Cool down wise, a lot of brass players do that stuff. I tend to think that low brass players do less of it than high brass players because there's just more intensity there. But for me, cool down is just simply, like you said, just a couple big breaths, maybe a couple notes, and I'm ready to move on. Unless I played a 7-hour gig, then I might actually do a little more low register long tones to try to loosen everything up. Just kind of really stretch everything out. So, but yeah, and I also think it's important, especially if you're coming into your practice session and you've done something outside of music that has caused your body to be tight or uncomfortable. When you sit down, maybe you have a pain in your shoulder or whatever, to actually physically stretch like an athlete would, I think can actually really help as far as warming up is concerned, or just kind of getting your body right for whatever you're doing.
And when you're going to go to your work, and if your work is being a jazz artist, you're going to be improvising. You're going to be spinning. You're going to be in the moment, and you're going to be trying to be as creative and as listening as you possibly can. So I think it's always been very important to me. Whenever I can, I can't always, but when I can, if I can have a slight warm-up, just warm my chops up, I feel like I'm going to be better ready to be in that moment. To be, I'm warmed up already. I can, if my hands are warmed up a little bit, I'm going to be a better receptacle to the creative forces that are happening in that moment in time.
Right, and with like the weather here in Northeast Ohio, if it's 20 below and you come in and have to play right away, it's probably not going to be great for you if you've been standing outside for a few minutes.
Yeah, but I definitely I notice the difference. I mean, it's easier to just, if I've done that 15 or 20 minutes, a little bit before I got to the gig, it helps.
Sure, great, okay. So this next one is, how much of your time should be spent on fundamentals? And so we can talk a little bit more, we'll say more student-based, because obviously as professionals you probably spend, I don't know, maybe you don't, but I would assume you would spend a little less time on fundamentals than you did when you were in college or, high school or middle school.
I spend an enormous amount of time in fundamentals
there you
because of my teaching responsibilities specifically. So I spend a lot of time teaching non-pianists. Tri-C.
Right.
So we're talking about harmonic fundamentals. And I'm a big believer in them. Just the stronger your fundamentals are, your understanding of how chords work, how chord sequences work, the fundamentals. I think once you and things that my teachers told me that I remember at the time. Remember the circle of fifths, man. Play this around the wheel, play this around the circle. Okay, right. I did, but now I realize just how right they were. Yes. Take whatever you can do, work it around the wheel, play it chromatically. All these fundamental concepts. Yeah. Know all your scales. All that stuff is real.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
And there I am. I hear their voices. Coming out of my own mouth.
Right.
Like this is the fundamentals are.
And teaching helps you kind of reinforce that because you're constantly
talking.
It's constantly reinforcing your own doing that. And just really quickly before we get to Jack, I just want to say it was funny when you said, know your scales. It's real. I once was at a college and there was auditions coming in for the School of Music and some student went in and they said, would play a scale, and he said, well, I only know one and I don't know what it's called. So yeah, it's very real. It's very real. Learn your scales, know them inside and out. But yes, I just want to say this is kind of a funny but also sad moment. I was like, wow, he was not prepared. Somebody did not impress upon him to know your scales. But anyways,
yeah, same for me. I would say the majority of my practice is fundamentals, like simple lip slurs, getting things working, timing, tone, so that everything is ready to go, everything's lined up. So, and technical things, technique, scales up and down, but I spend not a long time, but a majority of my practice of doing that, especially when I'm starting. It's kind of like getting going.
Right, it can be part of your warm-up process almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, doing those things.
And if you think about it, all the music you're going to play is some iteration of all the things you just warmed up with. So it's all the same notes.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I always say that to students. I say, of course you want to practice your scales. We're talking about hundreds of years of beautiful melodies that were created out of the diatonic scale. And then that's not even get started on the modes. All that. Come on. It's like, it's real. It's
exactly.
And practicing that, I also think practicing fundamentals can be a musical experience. And I believe in that. I think it should be. It shouldn't just be da 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 da. I mean, you can infuse the scales, or arpeggios or those kind of technical studies, and to make them into music somehow. Make it musical. Make it musical. I guess.
Be creative, as you said earlier.
Yeah. Those are all great points. So, any other, as we wrap it up here, just any other tips or anything that you want to know about practicing that you want to say? Anything else that comes to mind that we didn't touch on, or something that you want to mention?
Find a space that you love to practice in. That you can really identify with your sound.
Be someplace where you're not going to be bothered, and that's really difficult. Even in your own home, it can be very difficult. The distractions are, many. There's many ways you can be distracted. That's why the practice room on a university campus is very, very effective. It's a great place where you can just go and close the door and get the work done and be by yourself in there. Because I know for myself, if my mind is flighty, if I've got other things on my mind, I can just get up, I can walk around, I'll take a call, I'll hear the phone ding and I know I've gotten a text message or something and I get up and so if I can avoid those kind of distractions, I think it's helpful.
Leave your electronics
Yeah.
out of the practice room. You don't need them. Turn them off.
Boy, that's a heavy thing to say to a young person.
Turn them off.
Yeah.
Turn them off.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Bad.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with all that. And as we said before, I think it's, the spaces and the distractions and also distractions in life. Everybody has baggage. Everybody has stuff going on in their life.
Absolutely.
As much as possible, drop that at the door. People say that all the time when you go to work or when you show up for rehearsal or whatever, but just try to drop that at the door and really focus on what you're doing. It's going to make you feel better, number one, is because we love doing this, right? So you're gonna have a great time practicing, and you're going to really fall in love with practicing because it's a time away from those distractions as well, and doing something that you love. So try to do that as much.
The only other thing I would add, again, this is jazz specific. I'd like to hear your take on it, but practice with other people. You can get it's so much more fun. I mean, if you're going to say you want to work on playing a song in all 12 keys, which is a very, very important thing to do, a great skill to have. It's so much more fun when you're doing it with somebody else.
Right.
Practicing with other people is very, very effective. I mean, obviously there's work that has to be done alone, but you can also get a lot of work done, certainly within jazz music, practicing with other musicians.
Absolutely.
Yeah, grab a buddy, play some scales, see how well you can blend together. How is your timing? Are you playing in the same rhythmic cosmos? Or you're playing, are you lining up the notes? Well, you breathe together, you start together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, chamber music, awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So. That's our episode today, All Things Music. I want to thank Jack.
Thank you,
Sonny, for coming out. Joe Hunter, thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. It was a pleasure.
And keep an eye out for the next episode. I'm going to have a friend named Mark Russo on. And we're going to be talking about music as a business and just about how to promote yourself, market yourself. If you're going to record and you're going to self-produce, self-release an album, how you go about that, and just everything that has to do with that kind of, that topic. So that's going to be a fun one as well. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.